Episode 125 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast. Jason Bryant along with Matt Dernlan at the home office in Ohio. And Matt, the regular season of Division I college wrestling has come to a close. The regular season and all the other divisions are also coming to a close. I think we have one women's duel left tonight as we record the show. But for the most part, we've had at the Division I level 616 college dual meets, about 50 to 60 tournaments. And all of a sudden, it's one dual meet and one tournament that seems to have been permeating the discussion over the weekend.
Yeah, I was going to say up until probably late Sunday night. I think we were pretty dialed in about what we wanted to talk about, wrapping up the regular season, previewing the postseasons, everything, the super regionals coming up in D3 and D2, women's wrestling, all this good stuff. But it seems like all the great wrestling that took place was dominated by a couple high headlines, in the news stream this week, which I think, doing what we do, I think we've got to do our due diligence, dig into this, discuss it, because I think this is pertinent conversations, relevant conversations that affects the landscape of wrestling, the legislation, governance of wrestling moving forward. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting things to dig into. And I think, like we were saying, I think, when we started this podcast, I think, we always wanted to do our due diligence. I don't think our sport does itself any favors when we gloss over somewhat controversial issues or topical issues. I think sometimes we do our, I think it's in our best interest. We're trying to make the sport relevant, grow its visibility. But when you do that, you can't just gloss over some unappealing things that possibly maybe being going on in the sport. And I think, if we truly care about the sport and we want to grow it and make it better, you've got to address these things. You've got to address it objectively, and I think with our experience in the sport, with the different things that we've seen and the different situations that we've had to navigate through, I think we've got a good informed opinion. I want to discuss it without making blanket statements. I think we need to be objective. We need to look at this situation from all angles, because there's a multitude of angles, especially, with what we're going to get into. And I think we've got to dig into that and look at this objectively from every angle possible.
Yeah, and before we get into those specific topics, which one center around Zahid Valencia, they also center around the Last Chance Open in Iowa this past weekend. The positives we're going to focus on real quick before we get to those things. We had a great dual meet in terms of numbers, maybe not in terms of competition, with Iowa beating Oklahoma State 34-6. 13,109 gives Iowa the NCAA record for attendance with an average home attendance of 12,568. And that does not include a dual meet outside in Kinnick Stadium with 42,000, throwing that number way up. This beats their old record of 12,166. All 7 home duels were over 10,000. That's never happened before. And 9 duels this year, 7 at Carver Hawkeye, 1 at Hilton Coliseum, and 1 at the Bryce Jordan Center, drew over 10,000. That has never happened in college wrestling history. As of right now, too, because I do track the attendance, in case you're wondering where I get these figures, 128 of the duels I've tracked so far drew crowds over 1,000. I will have to go back and cross-reference to see if that is a record, but that just seems like a lot of dual meets with over 1,000. That is unofficial. Also, news that's happened in February. We've touched on this a little bit, but as the regular season has come to a close, Pat Pecora at Pitt Johnstown picked up another win, giving his now record 618 career victories. He is tops amongst college wrestling coaches. And also something that may have slipped under the radar as we head into the postseason, Don Murray, the head coach at the college at Brockport, formerly known as SUNY Brockport, but it's part of that State University of New York system, has been at the helm for 50 years. This will be his 50th postseason. No college wrestling coach in history has coached at the head coaching position for 50 years. Pat Pecora is at 44. Steve Eldridge at Coast Guard Academy was at 47. Bucky Maughan was, I think, at 45. But Don Murray, he has been the coach at Brockport since the Nixon administration. And, he's got some longevity. So those are a couple things that we look toward the postseason. Pat Pecora's got a dynamite team. Can they win a national championship this year? St. Cloud State also has a very good team out here in Minnesota. So it's a real tight race in Division II that's going to come up in a couple weeks. So I'm really amped for this postseason and getting first to probably the one match that we expected to be, drawing the attention in Iowa. Oklahoma State was Pat Lugo and Bula Wallen, and the focus seemed to be on Wyatt Sheets beating Caleb Young after the fact. So a couple matches here, Spencer Lee dominating in the onset, maybe had some questionable near fall points, but overall 34-6. And this looked like it was on the way to a shutout until Wyatt Sheets stepped up and pulled that upset.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody thought this was going to, we thought that I was going to dominate this duel. Now, if you look at it from a historical perspective, we rarely see this big of a separation in the dual meet score. This is the two most historically dominant programs in NCAA history, with not only team championships, individual champs, All-Americans. I mean, they just run the gamut about where they're sitting in the overall paradigm of the sport of wrestling. But to see this sort of dominance shouldn't be that surprising. It's surprising when you're talking about these two programs, but I think there was only two programs this year that scored in double digits against the Hawkeyes. I think that was Ohio State and Penn State. So for Okie State, the Cowboys to win two matches in the dual meet, there's been a lot of other programs that have been in this exact same situation. And that just speaks to the overall quality, depth, and dominance of this Iowa program this year. I know, we hear people knee jerking about, the performance of Okie State, but, it's not that this hasn't come as a surprise. We knew that, based upon the two recruiting classes that Okie State has coming in next year and the following year, we think that the roster is going to be built back up, or they'll be contending for a national title. But for this year, that's not going to be the case. And for anybody that was surprised by this outcome, you shouldn't have been. It pretty much followed script. I don't think looking at Pat Lugo securing a fall, I think his first fall in Carver Hawkeye Arena probably was a bit unexpected against a quality opponent like Llewellyn. But yeah, overall, I mean, there's not a whole lot that I can say about the dual meet. I don't think it was a surprise. I mean, the only surprise is that, when you see a storied program like Okie State, you don't tend to see them get dominated to the extent in which they did, on Sunday night.
Yeah, I mean, and Wyatt Sheets, here's a guy that less than a month ago, maybe a month ago to the date, that lost to Keaton Gertz of Northern Iowa in a dual meet, where Northern Iowa sat there and wrestled the Cowboys incredibly tough, obviously, as we know. And to your to verify your fact, yes, two teams scored double digits, Ohio State, as you said, and Penn State. Now, what's interesting to note is Iowa finished the season 13-0, one of two undefeated teams this season. The other was NC State, which finished with its first undefeated season in that program's history. But of those 13 matches, Matt, 10 of them were against ranked opponents. The only teams that were unranked they wrestled this year were Indiana, Chattanooga, and Michigan State. And two of those are in conference. So it's not like they're beating up on the Sisters of the Poor, giving up, 6 and 9 points. I mean, they gave up 9 against Princeton, and they gave up 9 against Michigan. Pretty much everywhere else it's been 6s. So they're averaging winning 8, 7.5, 8 matches out of the 10 throughout the course of the year. So there's obviously reasons for them to set the attendance record. This is a pretty damn good team this year.
No, and I mean, I think Pat Popolizio has shown that's his MO since he's been at NC State. He hasn't shied away from wrestling anybody. He's taken on all comers, and sometimes the comers don't even want to take on him, as we saw in the national duels a couple years ago. So I think that's a testament to Pat's vision that he's built up NC State's program into one of the most dominant programs in D1 in the last 5-6 years. But it also, I think his approach to building and growing his program has spread in elevating the stature of the ACC conference. And it's not just him. It just seems like, I don't know the discussions that go on within the ACC head coaches, but it seems like they are all following a similar game plan. They're taking on all comers, NC State, UNC, Virginia Tech, UVA. All these programs are taking on national caliber programs outside of their conference. And in turn, look what it's done internally to their conference. We now have 4 teams in the top 10 for the first time in
Yeah,
I'll defer
ever.
to
This year
you.
it happened,
Ever,
I think the
right?
last 6 or 7 weeks, it was 4 of them, and then, you've got, Virginia Tech was as high as number 3 this year, and then boom, there they go. They hit a loss with Carolina, they hit a loss with NC State, then they got upended by Pitt, with Nino Bonacorsi picking up the win over Hunter Bolin. We'll get to probably that today or tomorrow, if not. But, it's the strange where Tech was at one point number 3 in the country in the dual meet rankings, and they finished 3rd in the ACC in the dual meet standings, which is kinda nuts.
Which
Actually,
is really
excuse me,
exciting.
sorry, not 3rd. If you lose to NC State, North Carolina, and Pitt, you're 4th. Wow.
4th. Yeah,
I
for a
can't
team that
count.
was,
Was
uh
3rd, yes. It's
I'm never
wacky.
gonna criticize you on your math skills, JB. Anybody that knows me, if I can get 2 and 2 accurately, it's a pretty good day for me. So,
Well, and good thing that those are both freestyle and folk style scoring situations, so you're good
right.
there.
But I guess again to give credit to the ACC coaches. I mean, it's phenomenal. This is the way to do it. You don't artificially inflate your records to hope you're going to build your program up through the national ranks. There's one way to do it.
I mean, and
And
they did have 3 non-Division I opponents on their schedule. However, if you look at the lineups, they were not wrestling their full allotment of starters during those duels. It was, a couple of starters, handful of starters here, and then mostly their number 2, number 3 guys against Reinhardt, UNC Pembroke, and Belmont Abbey. So it's not like they beat up on those teams with their number 2, number 3 ranked offense essentially. That was also back in November. So those they do have 3 again non-D1 wins, but it's not like they're fattening up their schedule on those guys.
now, as much as I want to compliment, and I don't want to make much of this discussion, but I know that there's been some conversation out there that the ACC is arguably the most dominant conference in the country.
I don't know about
I
dominant. I don't think that's the word that's been used. I think maybe
what's the word? Clarify this for me, because it's still
well,
a stretch.
I'm
Whatever
going to use
whatever
the
the
word.
statement is.
Whatever it is. I'm going to use probably. I like to use the term when we talk about the Olympic trials as concentrated excellence because at the Olympic trials, for example, there is no fluff. Well, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of fluff in the ACC. You've got
No,
6 teams, 5 of which have been ranked at some point this year. Duke having a down year. Duke's even with no scholarships, Duke has been ranked in the top 25 in recent years. So if you look at top to bottom, okay, your top 5 in the ACC. Okay, well, probably not. The top 5 in the Big Ten are usually interchangeable, but you've got your Ohio State, your Iowa, your Penn State. Boom, boom, boom. Your 1, 2, 3, and then whoever's going to be challenging for that 4, whether it's Minnesota, whether it's some of the other programs, Michigan. You know, I think the top heaviness of the Big Ten, yeah, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Yeah, I think the Big Ten typically has the advantage. But when you look at, well, your fifth place, your next to last place team in the ACC compared to your next to last place team in the Big Ten, okay, it depends on how you frame the argument. I think from a concentration of conference, there is a better concentration of talent in the ACC, whereas the Big Ten has 14 really, consistent Power 5 schools. So but then Maryland's struggling right now. Indiana's been struggling. Michigan State's been struggling. They're on the way up. Indiana's shown some signs of life at the end of the year. So you're always going to have last place teams. But how bad are those bottom half, the bottom tier of that conference compared to the bottom tier of the other side? So
true.
I'm looking at it from a quality standpoint. Yes, there are 4 of the 6 teams, percentage-wise, are in the top 10. No other conference, but right now, as the dual meet poll will come out this year, as the final dual meet rankings, which have not been released by the time we record this, but by the time you listen to it, they'll be out on the NWCA's website. 4 of the top 5 teams ending the season, Big Ten. So right
Yeah,
now,
it's all
it's
semantics. I
yeah,
mean, I
it is
guess
how you frame it. There's lies, damn lies, and statistics. So
right.
I think you can look at the ACC and say, yeah, it is a very compact, powerful conference. The top part of that conference, obviously, because there is basically no bottom half of the ACC because they wrestle each other. The bottom half, the bottom team is Duke, which we've talked about previously. But you're comparing it. It is not apples and oranges. I think it's more like apples and pomegranates because we've got But I don't know. I don't think I can make that argument because the ACC is concentrated in very good quality amongst those top 5 teams. The Big Ten has very good concentration amongst their top 5, but they also have super good talent from 6 through 12 typically. Usually it's the 13 and 14th teams in the Big Ten that are, they're really not having great years, so usually they're not in the discussion. So I don't know if I can say that they're arguable. I don't know even know if it's arguable that they're the best conference. They're definitely in terms of compacted quality, yes, because they don't
Right.
have
Because I think on
they've
the
got one fluff team essentially.
yeah, and I think on the flip side of that, when you talk about the Big Ten, is specifically projecting out what the Big Ten tournament or the NCAA tournament could possibly look at, there's a good possibility the top 4 teams at the NCAA tournament could all be Big Ten teams. There's a decent possibility that all 10 champs could qualify or could come out of the Big Ten conference. And right now, I think from the latest coaches poll, it looks like the projection is the Big Ten is on pace for 90 plus qualifiers for the NCAA tournament. So when you look at that, it does skew things. But yeah, it's good that we're actually having this conversation about the ACC. That yeah, we have 4 the programs in the top 10, but of those 4 programs, there's still even the top program is probably going to fall behind the number 4 program at the NCAA tournament. But
Yeah, and you look at the teams in the ACC. We've already said throughout the course of the episode since I've jumped on the show here is that Virginia Tech is not a super tournament geared team. North Carolina probably got some tournament points with them. Where at NC State you don't really know, and Pitt, I don't think so either. So I mean they've each got a superstar or two, but again we've seen to place in the top 10. Especially to get into that trophy range, you're going to need 5 or 6 in
right,
medal contention. You're not just medal contention; you're going to need them on the podium. So,
right.
again, good dual teams, and again, what's one of the nuances in our sport, where a dual team that's going to win 15 matches and go undefeated may not even be in the top 5 come the end of the season, just because there's the limitation on how many hammers can go through and beat the field.
Correct. Yeah.
All right, what do we got? Again, one thing is Spencer Lee, thoughts quickly on as we wrap up Iowa State. I think Spencer Lee, his major over Nick Piccinini also was notable, even though again there was some discussion about the back points. He still owned that one start to finish. Max Murin just taking people to the woodshed. Dusty Hone is not a bad opponent.
No.
And then Travis Whitlake Jr. got a lot of play there, even in the loss to Marinelli. Stood there, battled with him. I don't think he put himself. I mean, he put himself in a position to win the match because it was basically a 1 point. It's a 1 move match. But I don't know if I'm getting the same feeling that okay, yeah, he's right there. Well, he wrestled a close match against the number 2 guy in the country. Great. The other guy still got his hand raised. Was he in close to finishing a shot? I mean, I'm not quite sold on a 1 point loss. It's one of those things where people, when I was doing high school rankings, people would email me all the time, be like, "Oh, he lost close." No, you still lost. Okay, when you give me a W, that's when you start moving up. I don't like moving people up after a loss, and I think there was some again of that. Oh wow, he battled. He was battling. He didn't back down, but I don't think he put himself offensively in a position to win that match. Other than okay, well, it's a 1 point match. It's a 1 move match. So I think Whitlake's got a ton of upside. I think he's finally starting to wrestle like we were expecting. But again, there is a 1 point gap here, but I think it's larger than a 1 point gap when you look at the actual match.
Yeah, to your point, JB, there are no moral victories in D1 wrestling. You either get your hand raised or you don't, and then you move on. I think that's just the standard messaging that all programs get, and so there's no moral victories and like, oh, I came close. No, it doesn't matter. But you got to give Whitlake credit. He gave himself an opportunity, and that's all you can ask for. Like, objectively, you're probably overmatched. So as a coaching staff, as an athlete, what do you have to do to put yourself in a position to at least give yourself an opportunity?
Mm-hmm.
And he did that, although the sounds of inevitability echoed around those 7 minutes in that match.
I want to hear John Facenda, the great NFL films guy, say that the sounds of inevitability. Dun, 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 dun.
And we saw those leg attacks from Marinelli, and Whitlake would kick out, and he's like, eventually he's going to cover both ankles, and he did. But yeah, I mean, give credit to Whitlake for giving himself an opportunity, and that's all you can ask for yourself. Like, I think a lot of people would be like, well, he didn't wrestle him straight up. Well, if you would have wrestled Marinelli
I'm
straight
going
up,
to walk right into your bed. It's one thing even my limited wrestling ability, I know, oh yeah, I'm going to walk right into this guy's best game. Oh, wrestle him straight up. No, you wrestle to win the match. Sometimes that leads to ugly Mac Lunas, Nick Marable 3-2 matches decided on 105 or riding time. That's just the reality of the sport. Sometimes you win ugly, and sometimes
right.
hey, I'm a takedown guy. Sometimes I got to win a 1-0 match on riding time. It happens.
Yeah, and you saw that from Marinelli. He was like, yeah, I think he made some comment about this is my house. Like, I'll take this. Okay, that's you threw every obstacle at my way to try and stop me, and you still couldn't do it. So he wasn't deterred. He wasn't frustrated. It's like, okay, he's prepared for that. You've got to understand, like, from Marinelli's perspective, it shows the maturity of how battle tested he is, and the tests he's gone through for the last 3 years is like, hey, he knows, okay, if you want to get in a shootout, I'll beat you in a shootout. If you want to get in a one takedown match, I'll beat you in a one takedown match. And like we said at the beginning of this conversation, like, you get your hand raised. That's all that matters. Get your hand raised, move on.
Speaking of moving on and getting hand raises, something that hasn't happened since 1983 is Princeton sweeping New Jersey, beating Rutgers and Rider in the same season. First win over Rutgers since 1990, and then first time they'd beaten both Rider and Rutgers in the same season since 83. And looking at this dual meet, 18-15, it's one of the, Stefanik with the ranking upset over Janser. I don't think that result really surprises me a whole lot. I mean, looking at the numbers, yeah, on paper, but what a duel. Jordan Pagano upsets Pat Bruckey. I mean, man, these are two programs that are connected at the hip with the RTCs there, and they're basically cousins now, or brothers or half brothers, step brothers, who knows. They have so much more room for activities, and we see the finale of the season with two ranked teams in New Jersey. And again, it wasn't something that it's like it was a hammer. Oh my goodness, crazy duel, but it was a good duel to close out the season. And I think this is the type of stuff it's just been great, because remember, it wasn't that long ago Princeton and Rutgers were not good. Not good. Now they're finishing the season ranked 25, and they're hyped to beat one another more than just like, all right, well, we finished 5-11. Well, we're 2-14. Well, we beat you. This is nationally ranked teams here. Princeton's finishing the year ranked number 12 in the coaches poll, tying their highest ranking ever in school history. So that's good things. And again, not talking tournament points, because they're a team that's geared for tournaments, and they've got a pretty good dual team as well. So I don't really think there's a whole lot here to discuss other than, yeah, Pat Bruckey sometimes does drop a match that you don't expect him to lose to.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many great narratives coming out of this. You've got one of the traditionally strongest scholastic wrestling states in the country, New Jersey, who are so passionate about their wrestling and about their state. And then you've got, the public versus the private. You've got the Big Ten versus the Ivy, and all the narratives that go on in there. And then to your point, to add another element of drama, you've got the sibling rivalry. These programs understand if they're going to ascend in the sport, the best way to do it is join forces in certain ways. And they've joined forces with an RTC, and there's been, you can't disregard that conversation piece, that what the RTC has done, it has helped elevate both the programs, and it's been mutually beneficial. But with that joining forces, like, as much as you want to beat your rival, when family's on the line, you want to beat family even more. And they're kind of like in a familial situation there with the RTCs, that there's a lot of familiarity now, even though there's close proximity, there's more familiarity with the program, and then more passion to beat each other, which I think is actually great. And to see it come from two different conferences as well, those extra added elements make for a really, really intriguing duel. And I think it's going to be really, really fun in the years to come.
Yeah, just seeing that, knowing that Chris Ayers, I had him on my Short Time podcast, a couple weeks ago, knowing that he started his coaching career as a head coach 0-35, losing to a number of Division III programs along the way, and now finishing the regular season here in 2020, ranked number 12 in the country in dual meet rankings, and in the top, depending on which ranking you look at, anywhere from top 5 to top 7 in tournament rankings is pretty cool. Another matchup, Arizona State finished up their schedule, which is weird, Matt, is I've noticed that even though that the bowl series from the NWCA, that the idea that we finish the season with these bowl type of dual meets has kind of waned, and it's gone. We're seeing the Princeton Rutgers now, and we're seeing Arizona State come out east. They wrestled two top 10 teams, top 11 teams, lost at Lehigh, and then beat North Carolina to close out their dual meet season. And of course, the results here are probably less to the fact that there's a situation they wrestled without Zahid Valencia, and that's, I guess, where we're getting into our discussion. We'll hold that, but we do want to mention that Campbell did win its first outright Southern Conference regular season title. They did tie for the Southern Conference title last year, and again, Campbell was a program that when I was in college, they were in the CAA, and they were not good. I mean, they had Dave Auble was the head coach at the time. He was an Olympian, and I remember sitting there announcing a Campbell Old Dominion duel, and Donnie Turlington was the SID at the time, and he goes, "Man, there is 12 people here watching two Olympians coach one another," because it was Gray Simons coaching against Dave Auble, and arguably one of the worst Division I dual meets I've ever announced. And now to see, what Campbell is doing, ranked in the top 20, they left for the East region, then they joined the Southern Conference, and it's really been just kind of a perfect storm with Kerry there and what he's doing. And a Campbell Davidson duel used to be also one of the most painful things to probably watch. And Andy Lozier at Davidson has got some hurdles academically to go through, but he's done that before. He was at Sacred Heart before, and he left the table there for John Clark, and they're doing well up there. So a lot of good things to discuss as we close out the dual meet season. But now I guess we can center back to our two main controversial topics to close out this episode, because it's going to take the rest of it. One, I guess we start with Zahid, where the Twitterverse was stemming that he had failed a drug test, and then the Arizona Republic newspaper at azcentral.com reported it. Arizona State's only statement, there is no press release on the website. The only statement here is that they're aware of it, and he was suspended indefinitely. Now, we know indefinitely does not mean permanently, and we also know that permanently doesn't mean permanently either in the sport of wrestling. But a couple things that are interesting about this is, one, there's, again, no more statement from the university on this. And from a media standpoint, people think, oh, we should investigate. We're not going to get any quotes. Zeke's not going to talk. Prince isn't going to talk. Pendleton's not going to talk. Jamil's not going to talk. The AD's not going to talk. The SID's not going to talk. Nobody's going to talk on the record here. So this is where the story sits right now. A lot of questions about the facts that have been, quote unquote, air quote, reported. Now, I do know one thing is I sent out my request for my NCAA preview guide that I put together, and a request for headshots. Arizona State Sports Information Office sent me 10 headshots of their starters. Zahid Valencia was not one of those headshots, which also interesting. Now, Track Wrestling still has Zahid ranked number 1 because, again, there has been no official statement other than the newspaper. There's nothing that's come from the school in a press release or posted other than what that couple sentence blurb in the newspaper out there had said. So the status of Zahid, I'm going to say there's probably less than a 20. I'm saying it's probably 9 out of 10. He doesn't come back, but there's still that, okay, maybe he does come back. Because again, there's so many facts we don't know here. That being said, Matt, you've been a head coach. We know, we're going to be careful with the white gloves here, because this is somebody's livelihood. And if these facts are wrong, or if we say something wrong, or if anybody reports something wrong, this could be damaging to, what the real facts are to the case. So we got to be very careful about how we say certain things with what's being alleged here. So that being said, the topic is relevant, though. Matt, as a head coach, as an assistant coach, as somebody who's been in a program, substances do come up that you pop for, whether they be an NCAA test, a school's test, or a USADA WADA test. And I guess the mindset here is, from a coaching perspective, how do you deal with that, and what are the levels that you've experienced that could we can learn from this, or you've learned from something like this?
Yeah, I guess number one, unfortunately, you do run into these situations, and we don't want to excuse an 18 to 22-year-old kid, but as an 18-year-old or 22-year-old kid that's trying to navigate, athletics, academics, life, because that's what it is. I think sometimes we fail to understand that a lot of these premier athletes are still trying to mature, grow up, and figure out who they are as individuals, right? And with that, there will occasionally be some bad decisions that have been made. And so I think you enter that realm when you become a head coach. You know that mistakes are going to be made. You educate, you lead, but really, I guess the first point is to probably get an understanding of drug testing protocol. within athletic departments. And I know there's things that haven't come to light. We don't know. And why isn't the athletic department saying anything? Why isn't Zeke Jones? They can't. There's HIPAA laws that are protecting their athlete. There are certain things that you can and cannot say, publicly before things are vetted out and things, where a conclusion is drawn. So before the outcome, and I'm sure whatever the situation is, there's appeals going on. There's probably historical relevance going on in this discussion. So with that, let's scale it back. And number one, let's address a typical athletic department drug testing policy. And I would say this is pretty standardized. I don't want to say everybody follows the same protocol, but by and large, most D1 athletic departments follow this said protocol that I'm going to lay out. First failed test in and out of season. It doesn't really matter. First failed test, typically it's left this disciplinary action or the sanction handed down typically falls on the lap of the head coach. It's up to his discretion what that is, whether it's a suspension from practice time, suspension in competition. You have to sit out a period of time. Usually that's up to the discretion of the coach. Once an athlete fails his second test, typically there's a 30-day sit policy where you can't practice, you can't compete. Some programs, now let me clarify, some programs will allow you to continue to participate, but not allow you to compete in competition. And that's typically a month. It's a month in season if you pop in season. Out of season, typically that sanction follows in the following season. If you failed off season, you sit the first month of the season. That's typically. And then the third failed attempt is you're removed from the program. That's pretty much the protocol that's followed by every D1 program. Now, what we don't know.
Also, Matt, real quick, here's something I also want to interject too. That's kind of typical. Now, these things change and vary at faith-based institutions, and there's some small programs in the NAI. It's one strike, you're done. I mean, there's schools that have religious title here in their name, and it is a coach got canned for drinking on his own time. Allegedly. I don't know if that story is 100% correct or not, but that's an example I've heard. So again. I think you've encompassed everything, but also remember there are some faith-based institutions that are a little bit more hard line on certain things like that.
Yeah, at faith-based institutions, typically that comes
actually from, of course, Matt, you would know this. You went to one.
I would know this. I would know it better.
You went to the biggest one.
Yes. So typically, what most at faith-based institutions, students sign a student conduct policy. So there's conducts for all students, even outside the responsibilities and obligations of being a student athlete. You follow a student policy. And so if you violate that, you're violating institutional policy as opposed to athletic department policy, which is one and the same. But yeah, so that's why I tried to clarify. Mm-hmm. For most D1 programs, this is kind of what it falls under. Now, in the case of Valencia, we're also dealing with a similar situation similar to Kyle Snyder a couple of years ago, where he was wrestling international competition while also wrestling his folk style competition. Now, if you're actively on a college roster, those failed drug tests follow you, whether you're within an NCAA testing period or UWW testing. So that's one and the same. If you were to fail a test in an international competition at a UWW, that would count as an NCAA violation as well.
There are some nuances to that too, with certain prescriptions that,
right.
One, the NCAA is like, okay, you're good there. Whereas there's a harder line stance again, like too much caffeine is something you'll pop for at underwater.
And that's one of those things that every institution that I've ever been involved in has done their due diligence about, expressing the responsibilities of the student athlete, what they put into their body, they're directly responsible for. Anything you go and buy at GNC, you can't just say, well, this is a public store. Anybody can go in there and buy stuff. Your responsibility is to know what's actually involved and what ingredients are in these supplements that you're taking. That's why you have nutritionists at all your institutions, where you give your supplements to your nutritionist. They go through it. They can say, no, this is approved. There's something in this supplement that's not permissible, so you shouldn't take that. So, same thing with prescription drugs, say for attention deficit disorder, you name it, any prescription drug, you have to, one, go through a procedure with your medical staff, with your institution. They have to direct you to a professional physician. The physician, therefore, then has to assign you a prescription, and then you have to carry that prescription. That prescription needs to go into a system that's approved and validated by the NCAA. And so you can't just say, well, I have this prescription for something. Well, if that prescription didn't go through your athletic department and your medical staff and it's passed along to the NCAA, then you didn't follow the right procedure. It's just like if you don't show up for a drug test, that counts as a failed.
Counts as a failed
It's a
test,
missed test. And most people say, well, I just missed it. Well, the policy states if you don't show up, you're automatically in violation of this drug test. It's a failed test.
Yeah, USADA is notorious for. Well, I think I was at the training when I was still working out in Colorado Springs, at training center. R.C. Johnson, Greco-Roman wrestler, and you're not supposed to. If USADA shows up, they're not supposed to interrupt your training or something. Basically, they have to wait until it's ready to go. And RC's like, well, I'm gonna go do the incline. So USADA guy tried to follow RC up, made it as far as he could. It's like I just make sure he kept an eye on him. So that's one of those things where careful what you wish for when you're chasing after elite athletes. Now that's all well and good. We've got the prescription, but now again, the report is we've got recreational, and what your people's various opinions of that term, be they what they are. One thing also to consider is that the cannabis is not on the banned list anymore for WADA. So that leaves a lot of people to start assuming things and trying to figure out and connect the dots on and what's being alleged out there. So as a coach, Matt, is there a line when you get to these type of recreational products, so to speak? I mean, that of level of severity, or are they all one and the same?
I think as a coach, you just have to have a standardized thing. You can't justify it's illegal. That's a thing. Like when I would talk to my guys about our policies, I'm like, let's just talk about alcohol. Number one, I'm like, well, for most of you guys, it's illegal. For most of you guys, you're under 21, so you can't do it. So legally, you can't do it. Nor should you. I mean, should you be consuming alcohol during the regular season? And then that goes into other drugs as well. It's like, I don't care how you want to rationalize it. If you say you want to compete at the D1 level, you have to abide by certain rules. And that's just how it is. I mean, we can, discuss, whatever our personal beliefs are about these situations, and there's ongoing discussions, and there's state and federal mandates that are shifting at different times when it comes to this. But when it comes to an NCAA athlete, if you want to be an athlete, you have to abide by certain rules. It's just open and shut. And so that's where I tried to simplify it in my approach. I'm like, guys, if you want to participate, if this is choices you want to do, then you're choosing not to be an athlete. If you want to be an athlete, you have to abide by these rules. Don't say, yeah, I'll do it, but I don't agree with it. Well, this is the rules of engagement. And I don't know if you want to expand on your personal philosophy, but I tried to simplify it as much as I could. Like, you just can't do it, guys.
Yeah, because again, whether what my personal opinions are on certain recreational drugs are, there are states that have certain things legalized, like marijuana is legal in a lot of places now. I don't know a lot, but it's legal in places where there are college athletes participating in those states. I think there was even a story that came out from the NAI last year where I think it was the baseball coach at Texas Wesleyan got snippy with a recruit from Colorado going, we drug test here or something. And he made it a political argument about legalized pot in Colorado, and that went kind of viral. So if you've got, college, yeah, it's might be legal in your state, but guess what? It's still not legal with the NCAA.
Right.
So again, it's a simple, there's the rules. The one thing I look at this is that, look, don't give me the whole, say hypothetically an athlete gets dinged for pot. Okay. Oh, and it's legal in your state. Well, guess what? You're right, Matt. They signed these are the rules of your engagement here. It's not like, well, it's fine out here. Well, I shouldn't be. No, you signed up. This is what you signed up for. That you knew the consequences here. And it's not,
Yeah.
I don't want to be that, because sometimes I go on both sides of the fence with the rules are rules crowd. But clearly, this is a rules are rules situation. You know well ahead of time what the ramifications are. And even if you're a four-stringer or you're a starter, the rules should be applied uniformly. Unfortunately, as a coach that sometimes that the superstar gets the benefit of the doubt and gets more chances than the guy who's a walk-on, or somebody that you can get rid of, and it's not going to affect your APR. So there's a couple different lines to go here. One, that's the rules of that's the rules of the duels. Just that's what it is. You knew it going ahead of time, and that's you can't really play ignorance on that fact. So there is a level of, oh man, that sucks. If that happens to a superstar wrestler, and then there's that matter of fact of, well, you're an adult. Yeah, you're a kid, but you're an adult. I mean, you're legal enough to if you commit a crime, you're legal enough to go to jail for it. So I mean, this is really kind of, I don't want to say that, I don't want to like look like I'm criminalizing this situation or a hypothetical situation here again, but it's just the position is you knew what the consequences could be. Insert athlete name here.
Right. And this is where we don't quite know when this test occurred or when this failed test occurred. I know there's been a lot of assumption that it happened over in Italy when he competed.
And
that hasn't been.
There's also a couple of people that have claimed to debunk that too. So again, we
Right.
don't know where the truth is, which is again why I'm kind of skirting the actual situation that spurned this discussion directly. Because even as a journalist, I don't want to say I've truly investigated, because honestly, I knew what was going to happen. You're not going to get anywhere. So some of it's like, I did some
Right.
cursory questions and got nothing. So,
And really, in what I said previously, none of the officials at ASU they can't probably say anything right now. So you did your due diligence to ask, but I don't think that they can really talk right now.
And the first thing I said I actually only made one real public comment on it on Twitter, and I said I expect lawyers, because there's a question of where who administered the test? Was it WADA? Was it where was it? That's the thing. It's like the NCAA. I believe I read some literature that there are some organizations that the NCAA does like say, yep, you're good. It's just like we tested you, kind of thing. We don't know that yet. And so again, that's where I'm kind of staying away, because it's like, okay, what do we know? And like I said, you're looking at somebody we haven't even talked about the Olympic ramifications of this with the Olympic trials. We're just talking about the college side of things. And if that's an international test, well, that's going to stick, because you can get a waiver or a grievance or whatever with the NCAA. You don't get those too often from the Court of Arbitration in Sport, or the CIS, whatever it is over in The Hague.
And I guess that would be, if it did happen overseas, I guess the one thing that if you're those, or if you're Valencia's coaches, would be the one thing that would probably frustrate you deep down, is that Zahid has extensive international experience.
Mm-hmm.
He's competed overseas since he was a young teenager at the cadet level. So any UWW sanctioned tournament that you get into and you win, you will get tested.
If you medal.
Yes.
I think he's like not medaled once or something like that.
Right. And so it's like, hey, it's not like he's removing himself just to take a fun trip and see the Vatican, right? He's going overseas for a purpose. That's to win a tournament. That's to prepare himself to make the Olympic team. He wasn't just going to the Iowa State last chance qualifier to get a medical forfeit or an injury default. He was going over internationally to win a tournament. When you go over with that intention, you're going to get tested. he's probably been tested repeatedly every time. And again, maybe I'm going down a road that's we shouldn't even discuss. Maybe this isn't where it occurred. I'm saying if
I don't know if we're ready
if
to go further
right,
down the road because again, we don't have all the information. So that's
I'm
again, I
just
think
saying,
we've kind of waxed poetic on the philosophical nature behind it, which is kind of where I wanted to get the mindset for this, and then obviously apply it to the current situation. But yeah, again, you didn't go over there just to hang out and wherever this might have occurred. It's like again, you knew what you signed up for too. You knew the possibilities.
yeah. So
Was that your segue into the last chance, Matt? Because I know you just mentioned it there.
I just mentioned it. Yeah, I
What
mean, I don't
controversy was
know
that?
what else. I don't know what else we can really say about the Valencia situation, and I don't want to look, man. Like this is a young kid. I know. We see him as this phenomenal wrestler. He is a young kid. He's made mistakes, and I'm sure people will say, "Well, I think he's made repeated mistakes." Well, I get it. I mean, your job as a coach is to stick with these athletes. I'm sure Zeke Jones has done everything he can to educate, to lead this individual, to
Yeah.
guide him,
And
to
look at
grow
that
him.
staff between Zeke and Jamil. They've got enough international experience to know. I mean, Zeke was the Olympic coach for a cycle and a half. It's like you sit there. Yeah, he definitely knows that too. So I'm under the understanding that the people that know the most obvious the situation aren't telling anybody outside of their circle of trust. So it's a wait and see. And again, my gut tells me he will not be entered to Pac-10. I think Pac-12. I think there is a small outside chance that happened. But again, I got we're a week away from competition. I simply something as simple as getting the 10 starters for what you expect to be your state qualifiers, and it wasn't Zahid was kind of leads me to believe that there's a distinct possibility that his career is done. Again, I didn't come out and say it was done because again, we don't know that. But again, I expect lawyers, and I don't think this is the last we've heard about the college eligibility question. And then the next discussion to have after the fact as we head into state college that first week of April is okay. How hollow is 86 if he's not competing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't get any personal enjoyment talking about this.
None
This kid's
whatsoever.
so talented. Like I love seeing this kid compete. This kid, the way he competes, you know, what he does within those lines is great for the sport, and you love to see it. And then, on the flip side of that, you look at a guy like Zeke Jones and what he's done in the past 5 years to position the program to potentially, you know, get back into national relevance, win a team trophy, possibly. That all seems to have taken a big hit, possibly. So I think, we should let this play out. I think the Pac 10 wrestles their qualifier a week before everybody
Actually,
else.
not anymore. Not anymore.
Not this year,
No,
right?
they
They changed
stopped
that.
it last year. Yeah.
I was gonna say
It would be this
we'll
weekend. It
know
would be
more.
this weekend, but
Yes.
it's not anymore.
But regardless, we will know sooner rather than later. I don't think, after this, I don't know if I'm sure we'll as things come to the forefront, we'll discuss it. But yeah, I think we move on to the next
And this is one,
discussion
Matt,
piece.
you've actually done. You did a little bit more research as far as some of more of the ethical situations with the Iowa State Last Chance Open, which is the second year it was on the schedule, was not on campus. It was, I believe, Gilbert, Iowa. I didn't MapQuest. Geez, okay, boomer. I didn't Google Map that to see where exactly Gilbert, Iowa was, but I'm going to assume it was pretty close to Ames. But we had situations where we had medical forfeits / injury defaults aplenty, and there were teams involved that weren't just Iowa State here. And the ultimate realization here is why they did it. Well, you need to get a certain amount of matches to qualify for a win percentage. You need a certain number of matches to qualify for an RPI. You need a certain amount of wins to qualify for the win percentage. Coach's rank is irrelevant because you at least had 8. I think you have to have 8 wins there to be listed in the coach's rank. So, Matt, you've got the coaching perspective here. You've been through this qualification system. Where do you think this stems from?
Okay. So number one, there is a loophole in the rules. There's a rule that can be exploited. So let's state the obvious right away. Did Kevin Dresser break any rules? Technically, no.
No.
He didn't. This is a permissible activity. Should you choose to go down these lines, and also every program falls in this situation where you have maybe one, two, maybe a handful of guys that are falling under the threshold, whether that be by injury, you've just haven't had enough opportunities, eligibility, maybe you weren't the starter.
Switch weight
Maybe you got
classes.
maybe weight class. Yeah, switch weight classes. You grew out of the weight class, which is the case, it seems to be at 184. Wasn't Coleman down at
Coleman was
74? And then
74, Sam Colbert was at 84, and they flopped weights. And then
right,
you've
so
got
they flip flop.
Jared Dagan, who was injured most of the year.
Yeah, so just so I think most people are aware of this, but your wins at a certain weight class don't follow you to the next weight class. You have to have that threshold at a given weight class, and he didn't. So, can you do this? Yes, you can. My thing is, JB, this is where the discussion comes down to. And it's not about necessarily did they game the system. There's a loophole that you could permissibly do this. So he didn't break any rule, but I think that to the larger conversation, did he violate the integrity of the sport by doing this? I think that's the bigger issue. Did you violate the integrity of the sport? And by that, I don't think it's a stretch to say, number one, he gamed the system, which was permissible, but how he gamed the system, how he took advantage of this loophole. And by having one of your athletes receive 4 injury defaults, four injury defaults, 3 of which were from Iowa State athletes in your program that weren't even 184 pounders. They wrestled up at 184 and injury defaulted. And we got to make a distinction between the medical forfeit and the injury default. An injury default counts as a victory for the wrestler. A medical forfeit doesn't count at all, right?
Correct.
So the way they use this, they changed the medical forfeit now to receive a win. Your opponent has to physically step on the mat. Why did those guys physically step on the mat? That's my question. If they were hurt, why did they step on the mat? It was their teammate. Why did they move up a weight? Was this directed by the coach? Did the coach tell them, number one, and okay, I'll stay on this vein. Number one, did the coach direct them, like, if you wrestle this guy, you just injury default out of the match? He's not going to wrestle, you just injury default. So you're asking your athletes to compromise their integrity. Not only are you potentially compromising the integrity of the sport, you're asking your individual athletes to compromise their personal integrity by going out and just quitting or not even participating, right? Okay, I could keep going. I could keep going.
Yeah,
JB.
I was just looking up exactly where these athletes were on the bracket, just so I don't want to misspeak here, but I'm also let's look at the Cyclones bracket here and see where these guys actually not the bracket, but I need to look at the roster just to verify the weight classes, because there were a couple of them. I
believe there was a 165 and 274 pounders that they were on the roster. I can't say if they moved up at all but where they're listed on the roster.
Okay,
I did look
because that's one thing. It's like, I can pull up Track Wrestling and look them up individually. That's one thing, but and I did ask Kevin Dresser yesterday. I sent him a text, say, hey, got a second? And we had a quick chat, and he's said, yeah, did a game system, yeah, because again, it was allowed. And 2, the Sebastian thing is the one that people I think are looking at going, is this involving a couple teams? Well, apparently Sebastian was going to do the old pull, the weigh in, make weight, default, you get a match. Paul Bianchi at Little Rock did the same thing. There's a couple athletes that, up at Matt Town, there were a couple wrestlers from the same team that didn't do that. They play wrestled for X amount of time, and then the result. You look at a fall time against team, and okay, well, they beat him in the room. Okay, you don't really get to that depth of it, but and Dresser straight up said he did not really expect it to be all 4 Iowa State guys. Now, because there was a Minnesota guy in the bottom of the bracket, and there's a Minnesota guy and South Dakota State guy, and then up top there was a South Dakota State guy and Johnny Sebastian. Well, we kind of knew that Sebastian wasn't going to wrestle. Okay, well, you're going to get that one in, and The point is as well, it's the tournament brackets. Okay, well, we'll set the tournament up how we set the tournament up. That's sometimes when you see a tournament director go, you get a request from a coach, be like, hey, we want this as a wrestle off. Can you put them at a 7-10 or 8-9? Little bit of a different scenario in the end result, but that does happen at tournaments where, matchups are made early so coaches can get a look, or they're separated so they can stay away from it. So that happens in both ways. Sometimes you look at a random draw and be like, no. But here, Dresser, he did not expect Tate Batani and who was it? Julian Broderson to, let's see, who is it? Broderson beat down here. No, so he didn't expect Batani to win or Caleb Long to beat their opponents from those other schools. So that doesn't happen. It was almost like, okay, this is going to happen. And then the perfect shitstorm came. It wasn't just a perfect storm, Matt. It was, there's obviously situations out of a coach's control when other teams are involved. And, do you think that the South Dakota State and the Minnesota kids throw those matches? No, I absolutely don't think they did. So it's like you got to also look at it from the other side. It's like, okay, you can allege this, but look at it. Is everybody in on this for one school? I don't think so. So again, there is some merit or some validity to what Coach Dresser explained about not expecting certain athletes to win matches. Whereas, okay, there's other guys in the brackets, and oh wow, they won. They wrestled the matches. Then when you get to the teammate versus the teammate discussion, that's, I think, where we get into the ethical conundrum of, well, you don't have to wrestle your teammate because you wrestle them every single day in the room. Yet there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Cyclones in that weight class. So
yeah, and I guess what I would say to that, JB,
that's what I got. Again, that's what I got from it. And one thing that just kind of playing devil's advocate on the other side of the fence. Just
and what I would say to that, and I've been around a long time, and I want to just call things the way I see it and try and be objective. I know I have biases. We all have biases, and I will admit them. I do have some biases out there, but in this situation, number one, I would expect Kevin Dresser to say no less, and my response to that would be, when you call it a perfect storm, I would say, I would use the analogy, don't pee on my leg and tell me it's raining, right? That's kind of what I would say to that, because for those things to happen, number one, the appearance is not only did you game the system, you constructed the bracket. You didn't even randomly draw your bracket. I would venture to say he kind of placed guys on certain lines for a reason. And yeah, did he think he was the Minnesota guy or the SDSU guy was gonna lose? No, but they were on the bottom half for a reason. The only opportunity they would have wrestled the Iowa State guy is if they would have made the finals. So I think he, it appears that he constructed the brackets himself, right? And yeah, it just, I just got to call it like it is. It looks like he just straight up, game the system, like I said. And, if you get beyond just the rules, JB, and I went a little bit beyond this because people have to understand that there's rules that govern the NCAA, the institutions, the athletic departments, the teams, and the coaches, the responsibilities of the coaches. So, these aren't just, fluffy, nice terms that they put in their handbook. These are important to the NCAA, to its credibility, the way they're structured. And again, I'm not a fan of the NCAA and what they do, but what they do promote, college sports has an important, substantial educational value, which is supposed to reaffirm and reflect the highest levels of integrity and sportsmanship, and should reflect and retain the presidential leadership and vision from university officials. That comes straight out of the NCAA strategic principles. Below that, you get into the NCAA presidential principles. It talks about, promoting the established practices and position of student athletes as leaders and role models who exhibit characteristics and attributes the general student population should want to emulate, right? So there's a moral and ethical responsibility from the head coach as a leader of these young men to show them what's right and wrong. Even though the letter of the law says it's permissible. Is it the right thing morally and ethically to do? In this case, no. I get it. I get it. Okay. Let's switch topics to the business of wrestling. Iowa State didn't give Kevin Dresser one of the biggest college coaching contracts in wrestling history for him just to run a squeaky clean program like, hey, no, they want to win.
Mhm.
They made the statement to the fact they gave him over $2 million over what, 5-6 years to win, to bring that program back to relevance. Not after a decade. They were saying, we want you to do this now. No, that was no more evident than Kevin Dresser leaving Virginia Tech's team before the end of the regular season to take over the helm at Iowa State, because Iowa State said, I don't want to wait till after the season, Kevin. We want you to start winning now and building it now. So that is, I'm not making an excuse for Dresser. I'm just saying I have a pretty good understanding the agreement they had when he took this job. It was to get the Cyclones back on top, contending for national titles, not in 2030, not in 2025, as quick as he could possibly do it. So he is. I get where he's saying, yeah, I was brought here to win, and I'm getting paid, and my staff is getting paid a heck of a lot of money to win. So don't tell me to win. Don't tell me to win, administration, and then take umbrage with how I'm doing it, because you basically bought me. You basically bought me. Now, he can say I had a price tag, and I think we all probably have a price tag, but
$1 million
the rules.
man, I think, made that his catchphrase for
Yes,
years.
that was the
Everybody's
rules of
got a price.
engagement, right? So, I think it's easy for us, and it's easy for us on the other side of the equation to say, oh, poke holes, but when you're getting paid that amount of money, when there's pressure on you to win and win immediately or as quickly as you possibly can, there are situations where you could compromise what is important to you and the culture of the program. I just don't think it's right.
All right, so there's a couple avenues I want to go down on this. I think you've hit the ethical and coaching perspective to it better than I can. My where I want to look is what's going to happen as a result of this. It's we I don't know if we've got no precedent on something like this before, because we know that coaches have been worried about the match counts and things of that nature since this procedure was put into place. 2008, 2009 season was the first year this qualification system. Now it's been tweaked with number of matches allowed for coaches ranked, number of time away from competition, number of matches for RPI and things of that nature, or win percentage, and where the sliding scale is as far as percentage wise on what qualifies. Now, is this loophole, was it created as a result because we've over legislated? I don't want to say that's probably the wrong term to use. This isn't over legislation. It's just a rule set was created, and then there was this type of situation is not intended to have unintended consequences is probably the best term to use here. The unintended consequences is that this loophole exists, or this thing exists. Well, we can go back and probably look at every tournament and say, well, these two teammates met. Well, injury default. Well, sometimes what's the difference between a medical forfeit over a teammate or an injury default? You're scoring team points, or is it a win? Now we're getting teams like, I don't want to wrestle non D1 guys because the matches don't count, or I'm going to go 2-0 and medically pull out of an open. So they're protecting their win percentage in so many different. They're protecting certain stats on this in various different ways to begin with. This probably the timing of it, and I guess I don't want to say audaciousness of it, but yeah, let's just call a spade a spade. The blatant nature of that's what it looks like. I mean, the optics look terrible. Now, if Marcus Coleman beats the guy from South Dakota State and then beats the guy from Minnesota, of those 4 wins, beats him straight up, I think we're not talking about this nearly as much. No. It's just like, well, but facts are what they are. That's what happened. That's how the cards were laid out on the table. So the question I'm getting at is it because we've got a system now everybody is trying to game, and they've gamed it so much that you have to one up the gaming? Or do you look at, this is a system that the coaches came up with, because the alternatives back at that convention in Tahoe, man, I'm not sure if you were there then when this
Yep.
discussion popped up. There was two courses of action. It was like it was trying to prevent the NCAA from saying one conference champion and then 220 at-larges or regionals. And I was against the regional perspective because I know it works at Division II and Division III. There's some discussion there whether how well it works, but I think if you lose a conference qualification or a conference alignment or a conference endorsement at the Division I level, that's just one more step from you being away from having no program. So I always wanted to keep the conference structure. And then this discussion starts up, and it was Tom Ryan who actually said, well, why don't we use current data? And that just got everybody moving. And I remember it distinctly. And we come up with this process. So the next year you looked at the data, and then the next year they implemented it. So, and since then there's those tweaks. So is it because we've had people trying to already undermine the system from the get-go? Are they undermining it, or are they just giving their athletes the best chance? What also happens? Does the Big 12 end up getting extra bids for this? What does this do for the Southern Conference? What does this do for smaller programs and power conferences? I think there's one coach who's been pretty adamant about this potentially costing his team possibly a qualifier. Yeah, the Big 12 probably going to gain in this if these, I'm wondering if these results are actually going to stand too. I don't have anything to kind of validate that point or give me that position that these might be thrown out, other than perhaps the failed skin check at the Cliff Keen a couple years ago when they totally wiped out all the results from that tournament from counting. So my question is why was this even allowed to happen? Or is it because it was allowed to happen because it's been gamed and gamed and gamed and gamed and gamed, and we finally have last chance opens, at the National Collegiate Open, the Edinburgh Open, and well, let's save money, let's do a tournament, and these matches count. Ultimately, I think, well, not I think, I know rules will change because of this. Rules will change, and you know what? This isn't the reason, but this is the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. There's going to be some rules changed in this offseason. Do not know 100% yet what they are, but I've been told that they're not going to be some rules that people like, and this is ultimately this was the death knell for whatever they're going to change.
Because what Kevin did,
it's been allowed. It's allowed. People have done it.
JB, there's a loophole, but there's a loophole with the intent of helping these kids that are unfortunately put in this situation, given what I just said: injury, eligibility, moving up a weight,
the limitations of the process, the shortcomings in the process.
I would say the majority of coaches with these last chances, like the Edinburgh Open and the Iowa Open from last year, it's like, hey, let's at least give these kids an opportunity if they're deficient in some areas. I would say the lion's share of most coaches hey, thank goodness we have this opportunity to get more matches. So you're not going to wrestle our varsity competition. We're going to send you to this open tournament because you need to wrestle. You need to wrestle matches, not get injury defaults. And so for most people, ironically enough, this legislation was put in for guys like Johnny Sebastian, who's had 5 shoulder surgeries, who's in his 6th year, that it's really hard for him to stay healthy and eligible. Is it beneficial for him to wrestle his entire season slate? No, not after 5 surgeries. So this is an opportunity for kids that are physically not capable, or, due to eligibility or whatever circumstances, there is an opportunity to qualify a different way. Now, what usually happens, this is when rules change, when there's a gross violation to the intent. When you take
messed up, and we're gonna make sure nothing like this happens again. And usually the reaction that comes from the NCAA and the rules committee is not one that they don't sew up the cut. They cut the arm off and saw and carterize it. That's what's gonna happen.
Yeah, what most people don't understand is that there has been a minor movement from some coaches that think there should be no open competitions. We should eliminate all open competitions, which that's going to be an interesting discussion that we could have. But this could be the precursor to the NCAA eliminating
that may be next episode.
Competitions, right? And then to your point, to the second point, yeah, Kevin Dresser was trying to benefit his individual athlete, which in turn helps his program, and a byproduct of that helps the Big 12. But what does it do to, like you said, I've had 2 coaches specifically tell me this is going to hurt my athlete and my conference. It's taking away a qualifier from my team and from my conference.
But we did by
So,
wrestling our schedule straight up.
right. Right. So there is fallout that's not it's not about Iowa State and Kevin Dresser. I mean, there's national implications here.
I also want to point
You
out
know,
Edinburgh. The Edinburgh Open has been on the schedule long before this qualification system. It's always been a February Open, as far as I
right.
remember. So it's not like they created an event for this type of thing, too. So I just want to
And
make
this
that abundantly
turned
clear.
into JB Edinburgh Open turned to that destination. I'm more familiar with this one because I was on the East Coast,
Right.
and that was like everybody used that. Like, hey, if we need extra matches,
Yeah, Lock
that's
Haven
the
had
place to
had
go.
its second Open. The Matt Town too. They used to have the Matt Town right after
Right.
Thanksgiving, and now and there's some questions about some matches there that were a little funky at Matt Town again because the result doesn't say injury default 001, injury default 001, injury default 001 for the same athlete. We're not noticing it as much. Sure, I'm sure we could go through and find some of these matches and see if they had video, and then we could probably again dig down in that. But again, that the actual instance of one of these type of things happening is not the issue. It's the fact that it's allowed, the fact that it's a rule, and what do you think as we wrap up here, Matt? I guess what do you think is going to happen as a result of this? Your experience as a coach, my experience inside knowing how the Coaches Association is kind of a vehicle for certain rule changes and polling the coaches. What do you think is going to happen here?
Well, I think you already said it. I think the NCAA is going to come in and say, "Up, here we go again. We've got to save this sport from the coaches themselves." You know, if we give them, we can't trust these guys. We give them a rope. What are they going to do? Eventually, they're going to abuse this privilege. And when you abuse the privilege, they won't just nip it at the bud.
They're
Like you
digging
said,
the
they'll
hole
cut it.
up and filling it with concrete.
Yeah, they'll cut it off at the arm. They'll remove the entire thing. If the tumor's in the finger, they're going to remove the entire
Man, we
arm
are
just to show a public
cliche
spot.
heavy here. It's not cliche.
Yeah,
What are we using? Metaphors. We're using
yeah.
similes. We're using, yeah, we're using all sorts of things you learned in fourth grade English class.
So I would think they're going to dig in and go to extremes. I could see there's a possibility, and this will be interesting to get into. I could see a possibility of elimination of all open tournaments and go to just a basic 5 years of eligibility, 4 years of postseason competition. Keep it simple, streamlined, and then you don't have a lot of these things.
And then the one thing that has also been thrown up there, I think Nomad and David Bray talked about this, or Andrew Spay, one of the Flow guys. I can't remember exactly which episode since they have so many of them now. The concept of matches against teammates not counting, and I'm for that. Now,
Yes.
there's also the outlier or the asterisk. Well, let's look at Corey Clark and Thomas Gilman. You're telling me that those would be quality wins. Those are opponents that like have good the RPI. They beat good guys. So you're telling me that that's I guess maybe the byproduct of this is that type of situation. Well, you're not going to get the benefit of it by wrestling your team. So or did they put caps on the number of entries now? Or if you're going to run an open, you can only run max of this many people per weight class per team. And what's it going to affect roster sizes? And are we going to go to more individual tournaments? Like, is Penn going to be, the Keystone Classic? Is it just going to be more of, okay, well, you're topped out at X amount of wrestlers and things of that nature. No more entering 40 guys in a tournament. So there's a lot of different aspects. I'm sure we're not even pegging. I mean, there's probably something that's staring us right in the face that we're not even realizing it's going to change. But once we know more, we'll know more. And Matt, that's a little overtime here going into tiebreaker 2, but oh boy, I am really curious about the open competition. I think that could be one thing we talk about. And of course, we got postseason starts again 2 weeks. We've got high school tournaments out the wazoo. I'm actually going to Minnesota State tournament, Matt. I finally got credentials again. It's
Nice.
been a couple years, but I'm excited for that. But yeah, a lot to digest here. So, Matt, any final words as we wrap up this rather interesting duality of arguments and discussions here? I think I used that word wrong, but anyway.
No, I think this is a fun conversation. I think it's a necessary conversation. I think these aren't conversations we should shy away from. I think we need to lean into these conversations because we both care about the sport. We want to elevate the sport, and by shying away, we're not doing anything to grow and grow the credibility of the sport. If we want to grow the credibility of the sport, we want to grow the visibility of the sport, the reputation of the sport. You shine lights on these things and you take stands. And for for better, for worse, it's going to invite conversation, which is good.
Yeah.
More conversation is really, really good.
And again, for the record, I hate the fact that both these things happened. I don't like it. I just don't. And I guess that's the way we might drop on episode 125 of the RUDIS Wrestling Podcast. Again, for Matt Dernlan, Jason Bryant, we'll see you next time. A lot more wrestling to discuss here as we move into the postseason.